This is the I Read Comic Books podcast. I am your host, Mike Rapin. Joining me this week, two representatives of the ever-present battle of man versus machine versus nature versus self, Gabe Cheng.
Hi. Hello.
And Renee Rodriguez.
I don't know what I'm representing, but I know we're losing. What up?
Thank you both for joining me this week. This is episode 318 of I Read Comic Books. Gabe, you are a very special guest on this episode because you have a Kickstarter that's out right now. Could you tell the folks at home a little bit about yourself? I mean, you've been on the show before, so maybe tell us a little bit about, the Kickstarter that you have running right now.
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me back on the show. Excited to be here and talk comics, as I've done a couple of times. I'm a writer, podcaster, pizza enthusiast. I self-publish comics. I've got a Kickstarter going on right now for my new one-shot short story called The Problem with Parallels. It is about two interdimensional traveling brothers who must resolve their differences while being chased through the multiverse by interdimensional assassins. And I'm very excited about it. It's my third collaboration with artist Elisa Menegel, who is absolutely incredible. And It is a comedy sci-fi story about running away.
I was, allowed to view the beautiful little preview that you sent over. And I will say it looks very exciting, and it is nonstop, like balls to the wall speed action from the preview that I saw. I'm really excited to see the whole story. I'm very excited. We'll talk a little bit more about that, I think, later in the episode. But for now, I have to ask two very important legally obligated questions. And that is, how have you been? How have comic books been? I'm going to pass it right back over to you, Gabe.
Oh, I'm doing great. I am working hard at my day job and working hard on my side hustle, which is the comics and the podcasts. Hopefully you guys are aware that the amazing, incredible science fiction comedy animated TV show of Futurama is coming back next year in 2022, 20 episode order on Hulu. And my podcast, as I've mentioned, was a Futurama fan podcast. We went episode by episode, my brother and I, and analyzed and discussed every single one and all the movies and stuff. And we thought it was done. We thought that we'd put it to bed, but no, it's back. We're back, baby.
So you guys like, how are you going to approach this on your show? Like, I mean, I imagine that the last episode talking about that was just like, okay, and now we're done and that's it. I mean, like,
kind of, yeah.
How are you reviving things?
Well, our last couple of episodes, we did a handful of 10 or 12 episodes that we called our quote unquote victory lap. And it was a bunch of list episodes where we listed our favorite episodes that were like about the three main characters, Bender, Fry, and Leela. We called them the Holy Trinity on the podcast. Mm-hmm. We listed our favorite villains. We listed our favorite characters that only appeared once. We did a debate where my brother Luke and I argued which was the most sci-fi episode and which was the least sci-fi episode. and so we ended it with our favorites of the entire series and our least favorite of the entire series and our favorite quotes of the entire series. So we turned over pretty much every stone that we could think of with this show, and we put it to bed as best we could. And then we signed off, and we were like, that's it. Thank you very much. And, feel free to go back and listen, because it's going to live on the internet forever. So I don't know what we're going to do. My brother and I have yet to talk about it, but there's that we've been kind of texting back and forth about it. And we've got plenty of time, but I think that we're going to pick up where we left off. We're going to do an analysis of each episode. We're going to try to get it as close to possible as when they come out, but it probably will be a little bit delayed. And then we'll do a ranking of them, as we'd like to do. I've been thinking about potentially doing mini episode reactions, like, the day after they come out.
Oh, yeah. Snap.
But we'll see how that works. That wasn't really the strength of the podcast, so that my brother and I both felt that it was really about the fact that I sat down and watched them a couple of times, listened to the audio commentary, went through the wiki article about it, and really had done some deep thinking and some analysis about, a silly cartoon. And that was kind of the strength of where the discussions came from. Mm-hmm. So I don't know that I could turn that around in 48 hours and get the podcast out. But yeah, so we're going to figure it out. But for sure, we're coming back. There wasn't a discussion at all about should we do it? Should we not? It's like, no, there's more Futurama. We did a Futurama podcast. We do more Futurama podcast.
Yeah, go check out Another Lousy Millennium. I mean, if you search for it, it's out there. Like, I just started typing another and it came up. I don't know how that happened. What did you do to my Google results? But yeah.
Weren't you on an episode? So that's
I mean, I was, but yeah,
that's probably the reason.
Either way, fantastic podcast. But yeah, that's super exciting, man. I was genuinely surprised when that was announced. Like, I don't know. I'm sure we could talk about this all day, but I don't know. It's kind of crazy that show's coming back.
I was very, very excited. I was not surprised. I'm not like a Hollywood insider, but I live out here and I work in entertainment and I have friends that work in entertainment. So I'd heard rumors that there were that it was potentially coming back. So I wasn't super surprised, but I was still extremely, there are rumors of things coming back all the time. Like,
of course,
IP is getting revived and rebooted and blah, blah, blah. But like, it's very, very exciting.
For sure. I guess beyond Futurama news, have you been reading any comics?
Yeah. I started reading Rorschach, which just dropped on Hoopla a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
It was it's Tom King and Jorge Fornes. He's got a accent at the end of his name, so I'm not quite sure how to say it, is the illustrator, and then the colors are Dave Stewart. I love Tom King. I love his take on Batman. The fact that he brought Kite Man like back into the zeitgeist, and now Kite Man was like a major character on Harley Quinn. Like, That's just awesome. I will blindly read anything that he's written, which I kind of did with Omega Men and Sheriff of Babylon. I just picked those up sight unseen and was like, oh, Tom King. I guess I'm reading this.
Yep.
So yeah, Rorschach is his not quite sequel to Watchmen. Like many people that have read Watchmen and love Watchmen, I'm pretty skeptical of any Watchmen sequels or prequels or remakes or anything like that.
Yeah, same.
Yeah, I loved the HBO show, but I also was very skeptical before watching it. And I read Doomsday Clock, and I thought it was, me personally, I thought it was like a bunch of malarkey. I thought that like it was a lot of nothing wrapped up in very good art and a very expensive promotional campaign, which DC put a lot of money into.
I mean, I'm right there with you, Gabe. So yeah, totally fine.
It is what kind of made me lose my faith in Jeff Johns, where I feel like he is having a lot of fun using these characters, but like that's about where it ends with me.
Sure.
So Rorschach is, like I said, not quite sequel to Watchmen, but really in the best of ways. It exists in the same world as Watchmen. It references familiar characters. They might show up. I'm only at issue 7 of 12, so I don't know who shows up necessarily. We've seen them, like we've seen the comedian. Actually, no, the comedian's already shown up in a flashback. So we've seen the comedian. We've seen Dr. Manhattan in a flashback. I think we've seen most of them actually in one panel flashback, and I don't know if they come up in the latter half. But yeah, it's about our contemporary society just in the same way that the original Watchmen was about the society in the 80s. It takes place in 2020. It's about a contentious presidential election, and it's similar to Watchmen in that it is ostensibly a murder mystery. Starts with a murder, and then there's a whole comic within the comic elements, similar to the Black Freighter in the original Watchmen. It's all about these pirate comics. Pontius Pirate, which I think is like a very intentionally like corny, like awful name for a comic book character.
Oh God.
Yeah, seriously. And I mean, it's Tom King, and so it's like that's I hope it's intentional because it's so bad, and it it hurts my brain to read it every time. So I'm sure it's been said. I'm sure it's been said by me on the other appearances I've made on this podcast, but like, I love the way Tom King writes. I love his cool, stoic, but like imperfect characters. I love the, like Mr. Miracle and Vision. And I can't remember the name of Vision's wife. It wasn't Wanda in his Vision comic. It was another synthezoid, but like so flawed and so imperfect, but trying so hard to hold things together. And it was so sad and beautiful. And I just love the way that they speak to each other and interact with each other, and how King like builds tension. So one of the things that I definitely love about Rorschach, that I've loved about Sheriff of Babylon and the Visions, is that they're slow burns, but he still manages to keep you engaged, keep you in it the entire time.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that because this is enough to sell me on the Rorschach series. I was so hesitant. I know that's Fornes's art is beautiful, and I think, I trust Tom King as a writer, but I'm always, like you said, very hesitant about anything that is non like Watchmen or like secondary Watchmen stuff, right? Like all the before Watchmen stuff. I was like,
I didn't read any of those. I'm not the biggest Jay Lee fan, so I didn't read any of those.
No, and that's the thing. Like I'm always hesitant, but you're making me think maybe I should try this one. It's been sitting on, like, I opened up the Hoopla link like as soon as it was announced, and it's just been sitting there waiting for me to borrow it. So maybe this is enough of the push for me to actually sit down and just devour that series. And I'm going to talk about it in a little bit, but I think that based off of what you said, you're going to love you're going to love the Human Target that Tom King is currently working on. Yes. Once it's all collected and stuff. Oh man, I'm going to have to pick your brain about it, because I think it nails all the points that you just mentioned about King's writing.
How many things is Tom King working on at a time?
Great question.
I'm not sure actually how many he's working on right now. I mean, it seems always a little bit less than Jeff Lemire, who seems to always be working on like 8 things.
Yeah. Well, I think King does a really interesting thing with his writing where like he will be wrapping up a book as a new one launches. And I think that's kind of common for a lot of writers, but like he does it in a way that it almost feels like he's working on 5 books at the same time. But if you actually look at the time scale of it, it's like he's finishing up a run on, Batman, and then this other book starts, and like Rorschach starts, and then he finishes up a Rorschach as another book starts. Like it's very smartly done, which means that he's ahead in his writing constantly, which is good, for everybody involed.
Of course.
But yeah, it does feel like he is almost like a Charles Soule or a Jeff Lemire or I don't know, a lot of writers that you feel like are super prolific because they've got 9 books going on.
R.L. Stein.
The most prolific author of the 20th century.
Yeah, next to Stephen King. Jeez. Anyway, Renee, how are you? How have comic books been for you, man?
Man, I've been good. I've been having a really nice time. Just everything's looking up. And I decided I've been reading just a ton of stuff, but I finally started to just hack away at the top of my pile stack that's been, getting up there. And since I'm opening up all the boxes from moving, granted I moved a while ago, but we're still building things. So
we're not on camera right now, but if we were, you would see right behind me are still boxes from when I moved back last March. So I totally get that.
Yeah. And if you saw me on camera, it would be a blank room because I am in between apartments right now, moving out of my old one into my new one where all of the boxes are. So
we get the struggle, Renee.
Okay.
We get it.
Yeah. So I was just been hacking away at that. And this was a book that I got a while ago, and it was The Question, The Deaths of Vic Sage, book 1 by Jeff Lemire, pencils by Dennis Cohen, inks by Bill Sienkiewicz. I don't know how to say
Sienkiewicz.
I'm sorry.
Sienkiewicz, I think. I don't remember. We have it on the pronunciation guide out there, folks. I promise.
Colors by Chris Sotomayor, I think, and letters by Willie Schubert. Again, sorry if I'm butchering your names. But it's a book about The Question, and I really love the art for this book. Like the pencils are brilliant. There's just a lot of flair, a lot of dark shading and whatnot. It's very noir styled, but the coloring sort of brings it to sort of like the 60s gangster vibe. So, it's it reminds me a lot of Batman Year One, just with, heavier shading. So, I mean, all 3 pencils, inks, colors are all just coming at it from all sides. And it's really good, and it amplifies the story.
Dude, what
also,
is this book?
Like the lettering.
Sorry, I just looked this book up online. I have never seen this book before. This is crazy.
Yeah, I think I wandered into a comic book shop like a while ago, which is crazy because I just wasn't going out. So I wandered in and saw it, grabbed it, and I was like, I like The Question. Let's do it. The lettering I actually really liked in this because the Question's inner monologue is in a different color, but it's not drastically different. And I almost thought I was just losing my mind, being like, is this a different color? Is this a different person? Is this a ghost? What is happening? It's really subtle, but I actually really, really like it. So, I mean, shout out to that. And I did fall off with The Question for a while. I just haven't been reading Western books. I've been pretty much reading manga and manhwa. And I didn't know that Vic Sage was back. I thought The Question was still Renee Montoya. But they brought back Vic Sage, which I mean, I get, but also at the same time, I don't really get, because I feel like, Renee Montoya has become, very much, the question at this point. So bringing back Vic Sage seemed a little weird. And also as a Latina reader, I was like a little sad to see, that gone.
Yeah. Yeah.
And while I did really like the look of this book, there's a lot in it that I think I've just sort of outgrown. Like there's a lot of really classic noir tropes in there, and a lot of it doesn't really make sense because it takes place in the modern day, and some of these old tropes don't really make sense to be there, especially because like they were doing a lot of things with like connection to organized crime, which doesn't really look this way anymore. They're still like modeling it after like the way that was in the 60s and even in the 80s. And it's just not that way. And then there's a lot of things that Vic Sage, he's like a late night host, I think, in this. So there was a lot that they were sort of like hinting at and all that. And it was really, really interesting, but they didn't go down that road. And so I think the book kind of falls flat because of that. But like there's so much in this book that's really interesting that I would absolutely get book 2 just to see where it goes. But yeah, it's interesting, and there's so much more to be explored in there. So I think I'll keep reading it, but I'm also like just sort of maybe aware that maybe I shouldn't just grab noir books just willy-nilly anymore.
Well, I mean, like looking at the creative team on this book, I would probably grab this as well if I had just seen it on the shelf. But it sounds to me like despite the all-star cast, I guess, on the book, it just didn't work. It's crazy to see that Bill Sienkiewicz did the inks on this, but not the pencils. But I guess like he's got a totally different style, but it's an interesting looking book regardless.
I really love the art in it. I think that like it's really beautiful, and it really has this whole like mood all throughout, and it's really really cool. And there is a thing in it where like there's these characters that are quite clearly supposed to be like mob muscle, but they're under the guise of paralegals, but they actually do know legal jargon, which I thought was really cool. So I was like, oh yeah, sweet. So that's bringing it more into the modern age, because you literally can't just kind of beat up people in the street and
you can't just be a crony and have that be your job.
yeah. They're like, nah, I'm a paralegal, and what you said was slander. So watch yourself, or we're gonna sue you. And it's like, the suing is the threat. Oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at the images of this for the first time online, and the inks do look distinctly like 80s. Like, I'm sorry, I don't quite have the vocabulary for it, but it's very, very scratchy and heavy blacks, and it's very cool. It reminds me of a lot of the God, I'm forgetting names, but like the Longbow Hunters and kind of subsequent Green Arrow stuff.
Yeah.
That kind of dark criminal elements and things like that.
Yeah, and there's so much in there that I think is definitely like intriguing, and I really love that everybody kind of, except for like there's one of the cronies that looks exactly like the mayor, which I got confused, but otherwise everybody's really, really distinct, which I appreciate always. It's that extra effort to, make sure that's, all your characters are distinct, so you're not getting confused while you're reading it.
Yeah, that was my issue with reading V for Vendetta, which is all about white British men. It's like who is talking to whom in this panel?
Just a sea of just similar faces.
I also got really confused in the book because like at one point like Victor Sage is like driving like a Volkswagen Beetle, and it's like really like bumpy and clunked. I was like, what time does this take place? But he's looking at a video on his phone, so I was like, all right, so it's modern day, so it's not
right.
We're not back in time. This is where I got confused.
So weird.
So it's definitely interesting.
I'm definitely in for like noir and detective, and I read a lot of stuff like that, and I 100% hear you, and it'd absolutely bump me as well if it's like, this is kind of a tropey thing, this is kind of a stereotype thing, this is relying on a little bit too much of things that that are too familiar. But if a story is good, then sometimes I do forgive those things.
Yeah.
But is this in the normal DC, or is this in Black Label?
This is Black Label.
Okay. So is it able to like stand on its own, or does it like, is it kind of in the in the mainstream canon.
I think it's standalone, and I think it actually can stand on its own because it's not in Gotham like where Renee Montoya was. It's in Hub City, something like that. So I do like that it's a little bit away from it. So it definitely doesn't seem like it's connected to the big bad world. It's very, just this city, just this town type thing, which I think actually really helps it.
Gotcha.
Looking into like, secret society type stuff, which feels a little bit like, Court of the Owls.
Yeah. Interesting.
But I mean, those stories have been everywhere, and they're also, really big in, noir detective stuff. So, I mean, I get it. And Gabe's right. There's a level of forgiveness whenever you're reading a noir type story.
Yeah, and especially with Lemire, where like there will be things that are strong enough in the things that he's doing uniquely, usually, where if he's falling back on some other element that is a little bit tropish, it's like, okay, like there's he's building on something, or there's just one part of it that's just not as good as another part of it, but that part that's good is like, wow, this is really good and fun.
Yeah, I think the main thing that sort of kind of leaves me on the fence with this story is that there's so many tiny little things that could like elevate this to like a sort of like an evolution of the noir style. Like it could be like, oh, you're taking this into the modern age, you're evolving it, you're adapting it into something new. This is a really great idea, but then it isn't seen all the way through, or they go in a different direction to follow those tropes instead. It's almost like you're taking, a step forward and then you're taking 10 steps back. And I think that's kind of why I've been very on the fence about it, because I'm like, there's so much potential here.
Gotcha.
But that's always the kind of what you're going into when you have like like a one-off book like this. But I do think that I will read the next one. I don't know how many volumes are in it.
I think this, like a lot of the Black Label stuff, they've been doing like 3 issues max, or maybe 4. So like you might not have that much to read if you do continue reading it, even if they are the magazine size, like $5 a pop or $6 a pop or whatever they are.
Yeah, I don't remember how much this was. I bought it a while ago. Yeah. Oh, yeah, it was $7.
Yeah, because they're like,
that's so much money.
Yeah,
but they're longer, right? Because the Black Label stuff, a lot of those books, they're like thicker. They're like 60 pages. I mean, and I don't know if that justifies this $7 price tag, but still, it's interesting because they're trying DC's trying some weird stuff, and I can't really fault them for that. It's just not all my cup of tea. Like all of the Black Label stuff that I've read, it's been pretty middling. But I don't know. Maybe I think other people have had much better like enjoyment out of some of that stuff. Like I haven't read the Catwoman Lonely City yet. I heard that's really good. So who knows?
$7. You know how many Jawbreakers I can get for that?
Oh my god! Renee, have you read anything else before we go too far down this candy lane?
Yeah. The other thing I read was We Have Demons #1, which I just randomly saw on like Kindle Unlimited, so I just like kind of grabbed it. And when I read it, I was just like, "What the actual fuck did I just read?" It's really bloody, it's messy, and weirdly, it's about faith. So it's the writer Scott Snyder, pencils by Greg Capullo, inks by sorry if I butcher this, Jonathan Glapion.
Sure.
Colors by Dave McCaig and letters by Tom I'm so sorry.
Napolitano.
Napolitano.
Yeah.
Thank you. I even practiced it beforehand so I wouldn't butcher it, and then I just did not stick that landing. Apologies, Tom. But this is definitely something to read if you've come from a conservative background or like a Bible-based background and you've kind of pulled away from it. But like, you still have like those little inklings of what you've been taught and all that, because it's definitely comes from that sort of thing. It's like about this girl whose father was a pastor, and, she kind of like feels at some point that he's been lying to her, but also at the same time, she's like, I don't really believe that same thing and all that. And like her father was also like a, what is that called? Evolutionary theism or theistic evolution. So it's an equal balance between, theology and evolution. So it's like, oh yeah, I do believe that the Big Bang happened, and just, those millions of years we're, putting that in who knows how God perceives time. So that could be the 7 days of the week, or the 7 days are also those billion years of time. All that, just God perceives time different than us. So it's like theistic evolution. So her dad was like a theistic evolutionist, like pastor in Florida or whatever. And she kind of moves a little bit away from the faith, and also just like her dad's teachings. But also like she thinks that her dad's into like some crazy stuff, because he like leaves for weeks at a time, and in his calendar he just writes that he's going to hell, and he comes back with like blood all over his clothes and stuff like that. all this weird stuff. And then she finds out that her dad was a demon slayer, and he's just been killed. So then she picks up his magical axe, and she has to go and kill her neighbors because they killed her dad. And like, she's like, they're really good folk. He's like, he takes, he works at a nonprofit that helps blind kids. And, and in his off time, he goes to this nursery that takes care of manatees who have been made deaf from boat sounds, in the water. And, she like, helps find feral cats homes and, all this kind of thing. They're very like, she calls them, or they're referred to as the Godkin people. So they're like the super nice conservative people. They're the nicest person. They're so nice that when you look at them, you start to tear up because they're so nice. But then it turns out they're fucking demons. So, she's got to like, rip their face through their rectum, essentially. Which, like, it's a very graphic book, and like they preface that. They're like, look, this isn't just a demon killing book. This is like, it's hardcore. It's hardcore guts mayhem.
I mean, I guess Greg Capullo can draw that kind of stuff. And
I
I guess
mean,
Scott Snyder's
that's my first thought. 100% is that the gore, the horror, the body whatever is that's something that Capullo can do.
I mean, this is honestly, I had a lot of fun reading this, and I think I will continue to read this series. Not, I think I will. It's going to be a very slow burn for me.
Sure.
But I really like this book. It's so weird. It's really weird, but it's super fun. I think it's what Blue Devil should be.
Renee, I'm not surprised in the least at all, because I feel like every time you're like, man, I read this weird book, and it's always about demons. Every single time it's about demons. I don't know what it is, man.
Look, demons terrify me. Demons terrify me. So when there's a book about people killing demons, I'm like, great, I can sleep at night. There's a couple less demons in the world. All right?
Yeah. You know what? I get
also, that. We're afraid of things, instinctively we're afraid of things that go bump in the night. So that's what's out there. All right.
Very true.
I don't get on you every time you read X-Men. No, Mike. Listen. I support you.
Hey, whoa.
I support you. I only ask for the same thing in return.
We support your fear of magnets, Mike.
All right. You know what? Okay, that's fine. Well, let me talk about some books that I read. I've been crazy busy. I'm making the mistake in trying to stress my body out to its maximum by trying to find a house to buy. Don't recommend that if anybody's trying to just like have a calm life. But beyond that, I read a handful of books when I haven't been playing Pokemon Arceus because I can't stop. That game is so addicting.
Nice.
But I did read Secret X-Men #1. This is by Tini Howard with art by Francisco Mobili. The core of this book is, what if a group of X-Men who didn't win the X-Men election became a team of their own, but they don't remember it? ? Minor spoilers, I guess, for the series, but the story revolves around Sunspot, Cannonball, Tempo, Banshee, Strong Guy, Boom Boom, Armor, Marrow, and Forge, who were all up for the potential X-Men election, and I think elections, plural, that have happened, where, the X-Men voted who's going to become the newest member of the X-Men, and end up being Polaris, and all of these guys didn't win. And so the opening of the story is Sunspot, Roberto DaCosta, sending an email out to everybody who didn't win. He's just like, what if, like, he was super drunk. He's like, what if we were an X-Men team? We'd be great, wouldn't we? And that's kind of the joke of the story. So when somebody comes to Sunspot and says, hey, I need you to help me with this mission, he says, yeah, I got just the team. Don't you worry. I'll get it all figured out. And so he brings this group of people, and they're like, wait, Roberto, you were serious? You actually want to make a team? And then they end up in a situation where they're forced to forget that they were a team. And it's a very interesting concept for a story. I think this is a one-shot. Maybe it was a #1. I don't know. But yeah, this book is a lot of fun. Like, Tini Howard, I think, has had some ups and downs in her writing for the X-Men. I think some of her Excalibur stuff is interesting, and some of it is not so interesting. But I'm excited to see what she does with this book, because while the core idea of this book is really contrived, like it's kind of clunky in the way that the story comes together, the end all bit of who they're working for and what's actually going to happen is really exciting to me. And it kind of reminds me of Hellions in a way, where there's like this offshoot team of X-Men characters that no one really cares about completely, and they're kind of doing their own thing. They're all kind of personality type A people who are like clashing, and they all have different, previous relationships, and some of them are on the New Mutants, and some of them are new folks, and some of them are Banshee Sean Cassidy, who's like one of the original X-Men, or Armor, who's like one of the young X-Men. And I think that the mishmash of characters is really exciting, and the potential of like, oh, they're going to forget what happened every time they go on this team outing thing together has a lot of potential to be fun. And I think that's what the X-Men line needs in general, is they need another Hellions book or Hellions-like book that's actually fun and can goof off and can make mistakes. And I really, really want to see more of this book. Like I said, I can't remember if it's a number one or if that was a one shot. I'm pretty sure it was like a, if you guys like this, you better buy it kind of thing. So we'll see if it goes anywhere. But I'm really, really liked this book overall.
Isn't that all comics?
Well, I mean, yes, but I think Marvel intentionally like published it in a weird way to be like, this might become a thing. We'll see about it. Or maybe it was like a precursor to another thing. But I overall really like the story. So I'm excited to see if they do more with this big smash of characters.
How old is Banshee now?
Well, with the resurrection protocols, right? Like it doesn't matter, right? If he's 55 or 105. But I don't know. It's weird because you bring up a great question of like, when someone dies and gets resurrected on Krakoa, what age do they come back as? Like how old is their body? Because like they artificially age the bodies, because like if you've been reading X-Men, you know that Gold Balls, he can all of his little weird balls that he produces are actually eggs that can be filled in with DNA and then grow new people. It's really gross when you think about it.
What was the other thing you read, Mike? Good God.
Oh yeah, let's we'll just move on.
What the fuck?
Thanks.
I have no context for X-Men, so that was just incredible.
Wow.
That was so much fun. I was like trying to like build these worlds in my head, and like just listening to the theater of the mind that was the description of Gold Balls creating DNA clones, and oh man, that was fun.
Somehow I think explaining what Rakugo is going to be easier than explaining X-Men.
Yeah. So speaking of that, so the other book that I want to talk about really quick is a book that came out called Akane-Banashi. This came out from Shonen Jump. It's one of their new debut series from on the Shonen Jump app. So if you're looking to where you can read this, or you want to look it up, you have to either have a Shonen Jump subscription. I think this issue is actually free. This chapter is free on their website. But yeah, this is written by Yuki Tsunaga with art by Tamakasa Mue. And I don't know, it's interesting to see a book like this that is about something not just like, he's a super action powered thing who wears a cape and he can shoot lasers out of his fingers. Like, the story of Akane-Banashi is about a young girl whose dad is a Rakugo, who is someone that performs this verbal style of entertainment where they are sitting on the ground. They can only use a paper fan and a small cloth as props, and without standing or anything, they tell this story from a specific sitting position that's usually like a long conversation or a complicated, comical, or sometimes sentimental story. And if you're saying, how can you do a comic book about that? I had that same exact question when I went into this, but there's something really special about, I think, the way that folks, when they make a story like this, specifically for Shonen Jump, which is aimed at, teenage readers, and specifically like teenage boy readers. I guess, like, I don't know, that split is kind of becoming weaker as time goes on. But regardless, a story about something like that does not seem to fit in the same category as something like My Hero Academia or Dragon Ball, right? And yet they are published in the same magazine. And I find that when you read a story like this, you can tell that the creator spent a lot of time trying to forge their story about this. I want to say, I call it a soft thing, but that's not the right way to describe it. But this less like intense action-oriented story, they take a lot of the tropes from other shonen manga of like of a revenge aspect or a moment of suspense drawn, based off of drama and built up storytelling suspense, and they make it work for a story that's just about a young girl who sees her father fail, and she immediately says, well, you know what, if they're gonna screw my dad over, they're not gonna screw me over like that. And she gets really hyped up, and you kind of read it and you feel super inspired. And yeah, this first chapter really sets itself up in a way, in like a non-action specific focus that adds this, like I said, this classic like shonen layer of drive for a protagonist, Akane, to avenge her father. That's like the built-in idea, but it's all revolved around this thing called Rakugo, which is this storytelling thing. And this story overall reminds me of something like a Chihaya Furu or Hikaru no Go, where there isn't like people fighting and drama and like you're my rival and blah blah blah. There's just a real slice of life feel to the entire story, but even that can be suspenseful and exciting. And I really think this book has potential to be really good. I haven't read the second chapter yet. It came out today. As we're recording February 20th, when the new releases come out on Sunday in the Shonen Jump app. So I'm excited to read it. But I really, really liked what I saw of the first issue or first chapter. So definitely excited to pick this one up.
Yeah, I agree. Completely, totally agree. Because it's another sort of non-battle manga, such as what Sugubi Oba and Takeshi Obata did with Bakuman. And maybe not so much with Death Note, because there was a lot of actual like conflict in there, but but it has that sort of like fun things that we have seen in a couple other manga, like Mike said, like Hikaru no Go, and like I said, Bakuman. There are a couple others. There's also another one that's out right now, Shoha Shoten, that's about like comedy duos they're like comedians. They're trying to be comedians essentially in Japan. And so that actually has the artist that worked on Bakuman, Takeshi Obata. So that's also another good series that's on the Shonen Jump app. But I agree with you 100%, Mike. I'm really excited to see where this manga goes.
Yeah, I think that like this book set itself up and reminded me of all the niceties that made things like the books that we've talked about, Hikaru no Go, Chihaya Furu, like there's a softness to it, but in a way that is like, I don't know, it still fits in the magazine overall. Like there's still the elements that make a good shonen manga in this story, but it's about something that's not just fighting and screaming and action powers and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, really excited to see where this book goes. I know it's chapter 1 and it's kind of a bad idea to get excited about a chapter 1 because you never know how things are going to go. But I think this one has legs, and I really hope that they continue to drive that same feeling as the story goes on. So
yeah, and there's something to be said with non-battle manga like this, because the art has to really breathe and really sort of emphasize something, especially when you're learning about it for the first time. You don't know what Rakugo is, or you don't know a lot about making manga, or you don't know too much about Go or Shogi. They're explaining it to you as you go along. So the art really has to sort of capture it and create this big, mural for you to just sort of be captivated by. So I think that's actually what I love about stories like this, because it's they don't have to follow that battle manga formula. They're sort of making it up as they go along. I think that there's a lot of avenues to explore there.
Definitely.
I have a question for you guys, just based on some of the things that we've been talking about. There's been a couple of number ones come up, and like a couple of times you both have said like, "Oh, I hope that this story ends up being good." So like, what makes you take the risk in picking up a number one? Like, what like you see? Like, what is your thought process for taking a new comic? I mean, for me, like the one that I brought up is, it's a Watchmen sequel, and I follow the author pretty closely. So this isn't like a huge risk, but like picking up something cold, especially if it's in for me, I don't read a lot of manga. I'm totally outside of that world, but like, are these big risks that you guys are picking up with these number ones, or is this something that like, is it? And like, what is your thought process going into that? Like, I'm always kind of interested.
No, I totally love this, Gabe, because I think the thing that makes especially trying Shonen Jump number ones, right? Like I talked about Secret X-Men number one, that's something else, right? But specifically when we're talking about comics being published by Viz / Seshua, who is the Japanese publisher of a lot of these books, or Kodansha, right? They have their own kind of online service. Is that Renee and I subscribe to the $2 a month Shonen Jump app, right?
Right.
And that means that I can read all of these new number ones as part of my subscription.
Right. Okay.
So the risk is just time. Is just, do I want to spend my time on this story? The thing that makes all of this really interesting is that personally, I think there is a level of trust that I provide to the Shonen Jump editorial staff to say this book wouldn't be in the magazine if they didn't think it had legs, right?
Yeah.
Whereas like the problem with Marvel and DC and stuff is I don't trust the editorial folks to actually put out a story that is super high quality, if only because I think that there is a level of like, this is just a big business trying to make their buck. And I don't not to say that, the folks over in Japan aren't trying to do that, because they 1000% are, but they're not trying to make their buck on the single issues or single chapters.
Right.
They're trying to make their buck on the tankobon, the collected editions, and any kind of merchandising that can come from beyond the story that fuels that. So there is like this inherent like understanding that this number one, this first chapter, isn't where they're making their money, and the only reason they'd be pushing it on me is because they want me to read it for another 100 chapters, right? There's like this thing of like they're investing in this creator to try to tell this book, and of course, if the popularity polls show that this book doesn't work, they cancel it, they move on. There's 1,000 new number ones they could slot in, So I don't know. Like I personally, I feel like there's a level of trust, so I'm like willing to try a new number one from Shonen Jump, because one, there's so few of them, right? Like they only publish like 25 regular books at a time, compared to Marvel and DC's like almost 50 each. So yeah, I personally just like, I trust Shonen Jump to actually deliver some quality stuff, and it doesn't hurt that I don't buy those books. Shonen Jump isn't going to shut down if I don't read all 50 or 25 of the number ones that come out, or all the 25 stories. If I only read One Piece, or I only read My Hero Academia, or I only read a couple of them, it's fine, because that's all they want, because they know that any of those properties could launch their own multi-million-dollar franchise just because the way that comics are handled in Japan, which is differently. But anyways, that gets beyond your question. Renee, what are your thoughts on this? Why do you try new number ones from the Shonen Jump app?
I like a snappy title. I look for I like sometimes the art intrigues me, and most of the time when there's a new title, they have a little blurb and they'll have a summary about what the series is, and if it sounds interesting, I will read the number one, and that's pretty much what gets me into it. Snappy title, interesting summary, and then I'm like, you know what, if I like the number one, I will keep reading it, and if I don't, I'm like, yeah, whatever. And
it's so low risk,
yeah,
right?
And sometimes those series become huge hits. Like I read Jujutsu Kaisen and I stopped, but it's still going. So, it's some people's cup of tea and sometimes it's not. But like Mike said, it doesn't, like, I pay that $2 for the service and I can read any of those chapters, so it's always there. It's a lot different than going into a comic book store or going on Kindle or Comixology and having to drop $3 to $9 on a book. Because all those titles are available. So it's definitely very different. Whereas like if I was scrolling through those other options or going through a comic shop, I'm going to be a little bit more picky. I'm going to flip through the pages. I'm going to read the summary. I'm going to see who's writing it, all these other things. But end all be all, snappy title and a good cover, and I'll probably buy it.
I think that's super cool that you guys have that much trust in that company. And I wonder, if it is one of the risks of getting too big as a publisher, and there's 1,000 other rewards to getting too big as a publisher that outweigh it, but like you do lose a little bit of that, or maybe you don't, because I think that there probably are a lot of people that will just pick up a DC or Marvel comic because it is X-Men or because it is Batman or whatever, or Superman, whatever. But I think for me personally, I've been burned by so many bad big two titles that I'm like, I'm very hesitant to pick new things up.
Totally.
Yeah, that's actually where I was. That's why I've pretty predominantly been reading manga over the past, I'd say 10 years, is because I was just really burned after, the New 52 and then the reboot and then the rebirth and then whatever the hell else they came out with. It was like it was like 4 things right in a row, and I was like, why I have to keep, I'm done. And then I was like, you know what? Instead of having to be like, there was a meme I saw where they were like, oh, where should you pick up if you want to read Green Lantern? And it's like, oh, you should read this, but also read this, but also read this. Also, this is a good one. And then it's like, hey, man, I heard this manga is good. Where do I start? Volume
number one.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the perfect thing. And the other thing is I'm looking at my bookshelf. All of my favorite series are on the bookshelf, and they are quite literally, there's probably 30 series on my bookshelves. Mm-hmm. So there's a ton of hits there that I found, but also just like to keep coming back to. Whereas with DC and Marvel, it's a hot mess to keep going around and jumping around. Not to mention creative teams switch up constantly, and sometimes those teams make great runs, and sometimes they don't. Mm-hmm. Whereas like with manga, most of the time it's either written by the same person or by the same team.
Yeah, it's there's like Oh man, there's like so much to unpack here about this, but I think that like that scratches the surface, I guess. I don't know,
Yeah.
Gabe.
I hope that it answers
No,
some of
I
your
think that was
questions.
great. Like I said, I'm very hesitant. So it really, in order for me to pick up a number one of anything, it has to pass through a lot of filters where it's
Yeah.
like, okay, like somebody needs to recommend it to me, or I need to read a good review of it. It needs to be an art style that I like. It needs to be a writer that I at least am aware of and, hasn't written something that I don't like in the past.
Right.
And then it needs to be the logical starting point for it. Which is why I tend to gravitate towards graphic novels, because it's like with Rorschach, for example, it's like, well, there's 12 issues, with Omega Men, with Sheriff of Babylon, with Visions. It's like, what's these issues?
Right.
And those are all Tom King. So yeah, it takes me a lot. Yeah. And I follow writers around. I will read something because it is. So I will read that question one because it's Jeff Lemire. And like I said, that there are some things that I don't trust about him. Like I just read his Joker.
Yeah, boy.
Yeah, it was. There's some things that were cool about it, but there are things that were just like, this is just another typical Joker story, man. Like, like there's some super cool things in there, but they just didn't capitalize on all of them. So I think what I'm saying is just kind of a repetition of like, I've been burned a lot, so it's hard for me to jump in. So I think that it's cool, and that's one of the things about just these types of business models and promotion and advertising in general, is that like once you get through the process of creating a user and get through that wall or that filter of like, all right, I'm putting $2 a month down for this, like then you have somebody that as a publisher, as a writer, you have an audience that is trusting you. So there's that pressure there, but there's also a little bit of that relief there, where it's like, okay, like they signed up because of your previous work. They want to see you continue doing that work. Now just keep doing that. And it's not necessarily about like trying to find the next big thing, trying to find the next way in. It is with a lot of other mainstream stuff.
Yeah.
There's I want to take a quick break. There's a lot to be said about this thing because we do eventually need to get to picks. Yeah, we still need to get to that. So let's take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about what's on the top of our pile. We're going to talk a little bit more about Gabe's Kickstarter. Maybe we'll touch a little bit more on this this number one debacle. Because again, there's so much more to say about it. So let's take a quick break. We'll be right back. All right, let's get right back into things. We did a little bit of talking during the break, settled some of our differences about manga and a whole bunch of other things. This is why you should come listen live, hang out with us in Discord, so you can hear all of these very, very extremely flaming hot Cheetos type takes. But yeah, we're going to talk about comic books that we're excited for. Let's get into the top of our pile picks for this week. I guess I'm going to pitch things back over to Renee. What are you excited for? What are you reading next?
So at the top of my pile, it's a little bit of an older series, like a year or two, but it's also written by Tom King. It's Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow, art by, I don't know how to say this. Is it Bilquis? Bilquis?
Yeah, you got it.
Okay. And then colors by Matt Lopes. I think it's Mateus. I don't know. It's Portuguese, and I don't speak Portuguese. But Shout out to the colors because they look bomb. And so it's Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow, and it's like Kara Zor-El going out on a space adventure. And I'm really interested in this book because it appears to be like a stepping stone for Supergirl, which is something I've always wanted to see. I've always been a huge fan of like passing the torch and like next generation stories, because I'm like, the Teen Titans can't stay teens forever. And, Caribbean Supergirl when she was 15 was fine, but she's starting to become an adult. Maybe we should get an updated name or something. And that kind of looks like that's what this book is. It's
Cool.
Whether she's going to become Flamebird or something else. I really want to see that. It's a story I've always wanted to happen specifically for Supergirl. Like since I saw the old Supergirl movie back when I was a kid, I was like, yeah, that sounds awesome. I was like, let's do it. So I have been very interested in this book, and I think it's absolutely needs to be the next thing that I need to read if I'm going to read a Western comic.
Well, on top of the massive piles of manga. But no, I remember this book when it was started to come out. It was like 8-issue series, right? So it's like, I remember that iconic cover of her with the sword, and I've never seen a Superman-ish character with a sword before. So what's that even about? Like that is enough for me to want to try this book.
It reminded me of
that
when
cover is pretty incredible.
It reminded me when Gohan has the sword in Dragon Ball Z, and I was like, all right. In Dragon Ball Z, the sword broke, but hopefully that doesn't happen with Supergirl.
hopefully
I love the synchronicity of us all on this podcast. You're bringing up, I brought up another Tom King, you brought up a Tom King. We're talking about the Question, who is the prototype for Rorschach from the old Carlton comics. There's just a lot of connections here going on. This is great.
Yeah, all comics are the same. It's what it turns out to be. Gabe, what about you? What's on the top of your pile?
So I'm making my way through DareDevil, the Chip Zdarsky run. It was one of my New Year's resolutions to get through his run on DareDevil. So I have number 3 at the top of my pile, volume 3 at the top of my pile, more accurately. The illustrator for it is Marco Cicchetto.
Mm-hmm.
I'm genuinely liking it, but it's proving to be a little bit harder to get through than I'd anticipated. I love his take on the characters of Daredevil and Kingpin. The art is fantastic, but I'm finding the story to be pretty slow. I'm kind of losing track of it as we're going through it. There's a lot going on, and he's definitely taking his time. So this is a problem that I've had with a lot of kind of ongoing series in the big two on very well-established characters. And it is why I tend to gravitate towards the graphic novels, and I'll kind of also use them as a palate cleanser. Like, okay, I've dedicated all this time to reading an entire run on Daredevil or Batman or something, and then okay, like now I'm going to read like a book that I know has a beginning, middle, and end. But that being said, I like it, and I'm determined to finish it.
Yeah. How many volumes is in this run? Do you know?
6, I think.
See, this is
maybe 7.
Is this the same one where Elektra becomes Daredevil later in the series?
Yes.
Okay, I am also on this journey right with you, Gabe, and I have the exact same thoughts and feelings.
Yeah.
Danny in the chat is saying that it's worth the read. Like, I'm guessing that the end pays off. So, I think you're on the right track. Stick with it. We all believe in you.
I believe it. I believe that it's worth it, because Chip Zdarsky has rarely led me astray, but it is like, it seems like he maybe had a story that could have been told in 50 volumes instead of 100 or whatever it is. It's like there's just a lot, and a lot of it is good, but there is a lot.
Yeah. I think our friend Brian said, so Brian, who's been on the show, he said this about Neil Gaiman, but I think it's also works for Chip Zdarsky, that man will not use 5 words when 50 will do. And I think also this book, I think it is like sort of the precursor, because I think like the next big crossover event is a Daredevil thing. So I think it could potentially lead into that, unless I'm wrong. Which
maybe, Danny says 6 leads into Devil's Reign, which I think is, or into, something like that. I don't know enough about Daredevil to speak to this, but this has been on my to read list for a while, like since it all came out. So I very much want to check it out. But it sounds to me like it's going to be definitely a labor of love to get through.
Mike, tell us about your Tom King book.
Yeah, so so before I get into what's on the top of my pile for this week, spoilers, it is The Human Target number 5. I do want to shout out our buddy Danny, who's hanging out with us during the recording. His pick this week is Supermassive, which I believe is the big crossover event that's happening over at Image with Radiant Black and Radiant Red and all those Kyle Higgins books that are coming out. His Not Power Rangers story that's honestly, it's okay, it's good, it's bad. Every week or every month is a toss-up on whether it's going to be your favorite book or your least favorite book of the week, but it's still pretty good, and I'm excited to see where this big crossover event goes, because it looks big and dumb and super heroic-y, but at least it's not the big two trying to do it, and I think that, like, we'll see. Higgins he's done all right. He's done pretty well with that book. I think that's who is on that book. But anyways, my picks for this week are books that I'm excited for. I actually have 2, breaking my own rules. The Human Target number 5. This is by Tom King, Greg Smallwood. The reason I'm picking this book is because Greg Smallwood's art is so beautiful. I can't find a book on the shelves right now that is better looking than this one. If you want to be attracted to every single person that shows up on the page, pick up The Human Target. if you want to fall in love with the idea of like what a 50s era spy novel story come to life in a comic book based in the modern day would be, read this book. Like this to me feels like everything that I love about, you know, like old style James Bond, and it just like the idea, like the romantic side of the James Bond stuff, not the, you know, misogyny and, you know, all that other stuff that makes those things not great, but just like that Johnny Quest or Venture Brothers style of like, there's a lot of just conglomerations and spy agencies and things and people smoking cigarettes and drinking whiskey. Like there is this idea of what makes a spy story quote unquote cool in your head from like a really simplistic side or way. And I think Tom King nails that with this Human Target story. The big question of who done it is there, and it's ever present in the way that he and Greg Smallwood work together to create this beautiful, just like slow paced, but very pointedly directioned book is fantastic. And there, especially number 4, there was a couple panels in this book where I like wanted to cry. They were so beautiful. And like the art's not complicated. It's not like these big masterpiece like wall murals. It's just the way that Smallwood is able to capture human emotion in the faces that he draws is unparalleled. Can't recommend this book enough. It's going to be one of the best books you can buy and to put on your shelf in the future, just from a damn, that's a good looking book standpoint. I don't know if the story is going to actually pay off, but fuck, it's beautiful.
I was going to say,
I don't know.
Greg Smallwood, I remember him from Dream Thief.
I was thinking about that when I put this down. I was like, I know Renee's going to bring up Dream
I
Thief.
love the hell out of that book because Greg Smallwood's art is amazing. Also, his unique perspective for doing panels, I think, is unmatched in other artists that are out here today, other than maybe Hirohiko Araki, who's been doing it for 30 years. But other than that.
Well, this book definitely doesn't follow that.
No,
it's very straightforward, but that lends to the cinematic feel of the entire book, and I don't think that that's a negative. I think a lot of the 9-panel grid stuff that they've done is very intentional for the look and feel of the entire book, and it super works. So Human Target number 5, really excited about that. The other book I want to talk about really quick is Step by Bloody Step number 1. This is Simon Spurrier on writing, art by Matthias Bergara, colors by Matt Lopez. This is a really interesting book because it's a fantasy epic that has no dialogue. It's a 4-issue miniseries. There's no writing in it, like no dialogue, which I think is a really interesting idea. We get silent issues all the time, but I don't know, like to go into a series and say we're going to be silent is incredible. And it's a mega sized issue. Thank you, Danny, for that information. It's going to be really cool. I trust Cy Spurrier. I think he's a pretty solid writer. And I'm always willing to try something new that he's doing. I didn't read the book that he did with Matthias Bergara called Coda, but I heard good things, at least from like an art perspective. It looked good. So I'm excited to see what they do with this book. It's coming out from Image. So, it's got to be something good a little bit, right?
Oh my God.
But yeah, I'm excited. A lot of good books coming out. Those two I'm so hyped by. But I guess before we wrap up the show here, I do want to talk a little bit more about this Kickstarter, Gabe, that you've got going on. Renee, I didn't give you a chance to talk about it when we started the episode. So I guess Gabe, you sent over the book to us. We took a look at it, and it's super fantastic. Renee, what were your thoughts on the preview?
Thank you so much.
So first of all, there's so many things. I wrote a list of it, but
Renee
thank you. I really appreciate it.
Gabe.
There's so many things. One, I want a perfect cheeseburger machine.
Yes.
Obviously.
Oh, yeah.
I want to know more about the world with all the cats.
The cats? You mean the dogs and the fedoras driving classic cars?
I mean that one too. Yes, I did have that. The 1950s Manhattan with animals. Hell yes.
Well, all right. Well, we don't have to spoil all the little cool things about this book, but
but like they weren't cats. They were bunnies. The rabid bunnies world.
Oh,
that one.
I'll tell you off the air what that is, because that's a bit of a spoiler.
That's beautiful. I had such a fun time reading this. I was actually really sad when it was done, which is a feeling that I absolutely love. Also, Full Monty shout out, hell yeah. I'm also an absolute sucker for stories about brothers. I have 4 brothers, so I'm from a big family, and we're all very close. So anytime there's a story about brothers, I love it. Also, there's so much storytelling within each panel. The red bearded man. One, I absolutely love the construction of those panels. The coloring is brilliant. Everything. There's so much little add-ons all throughout. I think that this is wonderful storytelling. You beautiful bastard. I love it. I'm a fan. So
Thank you so. I mean, like I'll tell you about that one. I mean, I was so excited for that full Monty reference too. That was just one of those things where it weirdly came to me, like the names of the assassins. I don't know. I hate being that pretentious writer that's like, I don't know where these ideas came from, but like when I was writing the assassins, I was like, well, what should their names be? And for some reason, I was just struck with, well, Skippy and Dynamo should be their names. It's like, all right, those are their names. Like, there's no reason for that, and there's no reason for that full Monty joke in there too. I just like, I so appreciate that you picked up on that. So thank you for that. Yeah. And the red bearded man is, I'm just so excited for that page, because I was thinking like, okay, like, you know, there's a couple of pages where they're traveling through parallel dimensions, but how do you take that up a notch? Like how, like after the moment where things become more intense, at the midpoint, like you can't just repeat going through more pages, because I've already done that. So how do I ratchet that up, both in the importance of the story and, you know, what Sanzio and Raphael are discussing as they're going through that area, and also like what can I do that is also within the world of parallel universes, but is not what the reader has just seen 2 pages ago. And it's like, so thank you for saying all those things about it, because I worry that I didn't accomplish it in that page. So I appreciate that feedback very, very much.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Also, I love, there's so much storytelling going on throughout. Like there's the things that they're saying, the things that they're doing. There's even like all those subtle things, like even the different way that I called it the sled. I know it's just like SLD. I don't know if that was intentional for it to be sort of like that. But the device that they're using, the way that the brothers use it differently, I really like. Yeah. Shows, you know, sort of how they are. And also the use of color when they're talking about the same thing. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Hell yeah.
Thank you so much. I mean, and that I wish that I could take credit for the colors, but it's all Elisa. She's absolutely incredible. And then just the idea of that part, and so that's in the end of the story. So I don't want to spoil it, but yeah, the idea that seeing the same thing, but from different perspectives, the idea of, you know, within ourselves are different perspectives of ourselves. We think that we're losers. We think that we will never accomplish anything in our lives. But at the same time, at the same moment, sometimes we can think that we're the greatest person ever, and that, you know, that we're killing it in our lives. And those two different, sometimes invalid, but sometimes valid versions of ourselves live in our heads at the same time. And so there's parallel versions of ourselves living in one body, and that being exposed in a way, and that being spoken about, and that being shown was really, really what I was trying to accomplish with this story. And the fact that it is about brothers, I have an older brother, and then I have how many of them are there? Two half brothers, and 2 half sisters and 1 full sister. So so that sibling dynamic, that relationship was really, really important. Is important to me in my daily life, and is important to me that I got it onto the page. So thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a fun read. I do have only one more question. Why specifically daffodils?
It's a Futurama reference.
All right. That's all I wanted.
Diggity daffodil.
Okay.
Yeah, well, I hope that everybody, you know, like Gabe, you know, I think you said it a bunch. You know, this is really exciting. This book is fantastic. So thank you so much for, you know, letting me and Renee check it out before, you know, the Kickstarter finished and stuff like that. So for anyone out there who wants to understand all of these strange questions that we're throwing at Gabe, you really should go support the Kickstarter. We'll put a link to it for The Problem with Parallels. We'll put a link to the Kickstarter. You can go out there and grab a digital version. Are you guys doing a print edition? Like, what are all the Kickstarter rewards that folks can look forward to?
So it's digital and print. With the digital, you also get my other comics, For Molly #1, Love at First Bite, which is another one-shot, and Into the Wilderness, which is a one-shot that's also a For Molly tie-in. I have some cool digital rewards as far as I'm going to do an audio commentary for it. And then I have a couple of my friends in the indie comics community have graciously donated their comics to the digital bundle. So there's a lot of cool digital awards on there. Print comic. There's a print comic with the variant cover by my sister Izzy at Izzy Cheng Art. And then there's stickers, which is actually the logo of my podcast, Another Lousy Millennium, that Raph, the main character, is wearing on his shirt. So it's because
I did notice that.
because the comic is a Futurama reference. It's my homage to Futurama. He's wearing the Futurama podcast shirt. So that's the connection there. And so those stickers are available. Also, the Cheeseburger Night Perfect Cheeseburger Maker that Renee mentioned a moment ago. From the comics, that is available as a magnet. There's the logo for that on the Kickstarter.
Oh my god,
cool.
And then what are the other things? The other things are the stretch goal rewards. There, I have my Support Indie Comics sticker, which is part of all of my campaigns. But then I have a friend of mine who's an artist on a professional background artist. She works on Solar Opposites, and she did postcards of 2 of the parallel universes in the comic. So from those places, the first one that you can see on the Kickstarter page now is Dinosaur Beach. So there's a postcard from Dinosaur Beach that you can get when we get to that goal, and then the second one is another parallel universe that I'm going to reveal in about a week.
Gotcha.
Ooh.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, everyone should go check this out because like Renee and I both said, this is a lot of fun. It's a really cool book. And Gabe, yeah, I don't know, any last thoughts about this or anything else you want to plug before we wrap things up?
Just thank you so much for having me on. Thank you for all the feedback on the book. I really appreciate it. I mean, this has been a really fun book to write. It is, like I said, my Futurama homage. Some things are flat out ripped off, like the daffodil joke in there that you mentioned, which I'm proudly ripping off. And I'm excited for this book. I really am, and because it was a lot of fun to write it, and it was a lot of fun to make the rewards for it. But also, just Elisa is just at the top of her game. This is just incredible what she's done with the lines and colors in this book. It is absolutely beautiful. There's so many things in there that people say, "Oh, I love this, I live this," and I have to say, like 100%, it is her. Like the whole first panel or second panel on the first page where you see this parallel universe that Raphael is living in. You know, I wrote a description where it was like Futurama and the Jetsons and things like that, but like so much of it, she just took it and ran. And it's a third of the page and it is just gorgeous. And It is this beautiful sunrise too. And you know, the city is on tiers, and it's which was completely her idea. There's people in jetpacks, which it's everything about it is so beautiful. Every panel was so great. And I love working with her. She's an incredible talent.
Whose idea was his house being in black and white?
That was kind of my idea. Yeah, because it's not 100% in black and white, but there's the idea that so at the very beginning, this is not a spoiler. This is how the story starts. Raph has gone into another parallel universe where things are perfect because things were not great in his. So he went out searching for one and he found one that's perfect. But so I wanted his apartment with L9, his robot wife, to feel like he was living in a place that he didn't belong in. Like it was like right out of a design catalog, or it was a very fancy hotel. Like there's nothing particularly homey about it. Like there's nothing like it felt like a home because he didn't really belong there. He was just kind of trying to drop himself in there, and it didn't quite fit. So yeah, that was something that was intentional.
Gotcha. Yeah, I noticed that. I was like, oh, it's a very I Love Lucy, and I do really like that.
She is L9, the robot wife, is based on Elizabeth Olsen in the first couple episodes of WandaVision / Mary Tyler Moore. So yeah, I'm glad you picked up on that.
Yeah, really cool. Well, I guess beyond that, Gabe, where can folks find you on the internet if they have any questions about this, or they just want to reach out and say what's up?
My website is GabeChengComics.com, and I'm on Instagram and Twitter at GabeChengComics.
Cool. Well, I'll make sure to have links to those in the show notes. For everyone who's listening next week. We've got a book of the month coming up for February. We did like a you pick based on a theme type of thing, and Kate, Kara, and I will be talking about one of the books that was nominated in the group called In the Pines 5 Murder Ballads, which I think is like it's like a series of short stories all about murder. I'm very excited about that. And as always, you can follow us on Twitter. You can follow Renee at Rodriguer29. You can follow me at Mike Rapin, and you can follow the show on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok at IRCB Podcast.
This episode first aired on Patreon and is possible because of our wonderful patrons. Join today for exclusive series like IRCB Movie Club, Saga of Saga, and so much more. You can join now at patreon.com/IRCB Podcast.
And if you haven't already, please rate and review our show 5 stars. That's it, and nothing less. We deserve it. Make sure to rate us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts.
Join the IRCB Discord community to chat comics and more. Plus, you can listen to our episodes live as we record every week. There's a link to our Discord link in the show notes. Podcasts
grow best when they're spread by word of mouth, so why not tell your friends, family, and local comic shop about IRCB? It's probably the nicest thing you could do this week. Infinity Shred is the best band in the universe. They do all of our music. Zander is a very cool guy who makes us sound very cool every single week by editing the show. I want to say thank you to Gabe. I want to say thank you to Renee for coming on the show this week. You guys are fantastic. Thank you to everybody out there who listens, and thank you to Danny for listening live with us. You are all fantastic human beings. So until next time, comics are good, and so are you.